He once turned a single dollar into millions, but it was all a grand illusion. Boston, summer of 1920. The city hummed with excitement as thousands of people lined the sidewalks, clutching envelopes of cash. At the center of this frenzy stood an Italian-American businessman, his sharp jawline set in confidence, his smile radiating trust. His name was Charles Ponzi, and he promised something no bank dared: a fortune in just weeks. Hit like and subscribe right now, because you're about to hear the story of Charles Ponzi, the man who turned greed into one of the biggest scams in history. The newspapers called it a miracle. Headlines screamed, "Ponzi pays investors 54 in 45 days." Ordinary workers, waitresses, and factorymen spoke of him like a savior. He wasn't a Wall Street titan, nor a powerful banker. He was an immigrant just like them who had cracked the code of wealth. In cafes and barbershops, his name spread like wildfire, carried on whispers of quick riches. People sold heirlooms, mortgaged their homes, borrowed from friends, all to hand their savings to Ponzi. He shook hands, signed receipts, and looked every investor in the eye with calm assurance. The trust he inspired was magnetic. To many, he wasn't just offering money. He was offering hope, the chance to rise above struggle, the promise of the American dream delivered on silver trays of profit. But here's the shocking twist. Ponzi never invested in the international reply coupons he spoke of. There was no secret loophole, no brilliant trade. Every dollar he paid out came from new investors' money, an endless cycle of illusion. For a short, dazzling season, America believed in his dream. But beneath the golden glow, the foundation was already crumbling. In just months, Charles Ponzi collected over $20 million, an unimaginable fortune in 1920, equal to hundreds of millions today. But soon, the truth would unravel. Investors would lose everything. Families would break, and the name Ponzi would forever be etched into history, not as a hero, but as the father of fraud. Before the scandal, before the headlines, Charles Ponzi was just another immigrant stepping off a ship in Boston in 1903. He had nothing in his pocket, barely a few dollars, and no clear path to success. Like so many who came to America at the turn of the century, he carried only hope, ambition, and a burning desire to prove himself. To the strangers passing him on the crowded docks, he looked ordinary. But inside, Ponzi felt destined for greatness. He worked odd jobs: dishwasher in a restaurant, clerk at a small shop, even a bank teller. Each position promised stability, but offered little more than survival. Ponzi watched others climb the ladder of wealth while he stayed stuck at the bottom. He dreamed of silk suits, fast cars, and the life of a gentleman. To friends, he was charismatic and talkative, always telling stories, always convincing people that tomorrow would be brighter. Deep down, he wanted more than just to live. He wanted to be remembered. Life in America was hard for immigrants. Rent consumed his paycheck, food was expensive, and prejudice followed him everywhere. But Ponzi never let failure crush his spirit. He was endlessly ambitious, reading financial newspapers, studying schemes, and searching for that one breakthrough idea. To fellow immigrants, he was relatable, a man who worked hard, joked about misfortune, and dreamed of riches. He embodied the struggle of millions, and that made his eventual rise seem even more believable. What set Ponzi apart was not money or status, but charm. He had a way of speaking that lit up a room. He could make strangers laugh, convince skeptics, and turn doubt into trust. People enjoyed his company. They saw in him not a con man, but a dreamer, someone who, like them, was fighting for a chance. It was this charisma that would later draw investors by the thousands, long before they realized what danger lurked beneath. By the time he was in his late 30s, Charles Ponzi was still searching for his big break. He had failed in business, been cheated by others, and even spent time in prison for small frauds. Yet he carried himself with unshakable confidence, dressing sharply even when his pockets were empty. He looked in the mirror and saw not a failure, but a man destined to rise. This was the relatable heart of his story. Charles Ponzi wasn't born a villain. He was born a dreamer, chasing the same promise that lured millions to America. It all began with an idea so simple, yet so seductive, that it could blind even the wisest investor. Charles Ponzi discovered the concept of the International Reply Coupon, a small postal voucher that could, in theory, be exchanged across countries for profit. To most, it was a trivial piece of paper. To Ponzi, it was the perfect story. He told investors he had found a loophole. Buy these coupons cheaply in Europe, redeem them for higher value in America, and pocket the difference. It sounded genius, and Ponzi knew how to sell it. Standing in his small Boston office, he would smile at nervous workers who brought their life savings, explaining in gentle yet persuasive tones how their money would double in weeks. He never spoke like a banker full of jargon. He spoke like a friend, a fellow dreamer who had cracked the system. That was the magic. He didn't just sell profits. He sold hope. Within weeks, word spread like wildfire. Ordinary people became his messengers, convincing neighbors and coworkers to invest. His first investors, paid with money from newcomers, bragged about their quick returns. The cycle fed itself. What began with dozens of clients soon became hundreds, then thousands, all desperate to hand Ponzi their cash. By summer 1920, Ponzi's scheme had become a tidal wave. People lined the streets outside his office from dawn until dusk. Clerks, teachers, even policemen, all waiting for their turn to invest. In a single day, he collected more than $250,000, an astronomical sum for the era. Banks trembled. Newspapers glorified him, and families believed salvation had arrived. Ponzi expanded quickly. He hired clerks to count money, issued thousands of receipts, and even bought a luxurious mansion in Lexington to cement his image of success. Everywhere he went, people treated him like royalty. Investors clapped him on the back, reporters begged for interviews, and strangers shouted his name in admiration. But behind closed doors, Ponzi knew the truth. He never purchased the coupons. There weren't enough in circulation to justify the money pouring in. His empire was nothing but paper promises, fueled by new deposits. Yet instead of stopping, he doubled down. The more people invested, the more he smiled, the more he built his illusion. He was trapped inside his own creation, riding a storm he could no longer control. As millions poured in, whispers of doubt began to surface. Competitors questioned how Ponzi could deliver such returns. Journalists started digging. Banks refused to lend him support. But Ponzi brushed it all aside, drowning suspicion in displays of wealth. He drove flashy cars, entertained guests in lavish parties, and reassured investors with his most valuable asset, confidence. Privately, he knew the end was inevitable. The math didn't work. To sustain his scheme, he needed an endless supply of the new investors, and even the numbers were exploding beyond reason. By July 1920, Ponzi owed investors more than $15 million. Yet his actual profits from coupons were virtually zero. Still, he refused to admit defeat. Pride, ambition, and fear pushed him forward. This was Ponzi's great obstacle. He could not escape his own illusion. The very charisma that built his empire now chained him to a lie too large to confess. He had promised the impossible, and thousands believed him. To reveal the truth would destroy not only his empire, but also the fragile dream of countless families who trusted him. And so he smiled, shook hands, and continued the charade, even as the ground beneath him cracked open. By July of 1920, the cracks in Ponzi's empire began to show. Journalists, led by the Boston Post, questioned how one man could generate such enormous profits from something as trivial as postal coupons. Experts calculated that to fulfill Ponzi's promises, he would have needed more reply coupons than existed in the entire world. Investors still lined up, but whispers of doubt filled the air. Banks turned suspicious, regulators demanded answers, and the government began to circle. Ponzi, ever confident, tried to silence the noise. He invited reporters into his office, flashed ledgers filled with numbers, and even sued critics for libel. For a moment, his charm still worked. Many investors defended him fiercely, claiming that Ponzi was being attacked because he was an immigrant who had outsmarted the establishment. But behind the curtain, the truth grew impossible to hide. Ponzi owed millions, money that no real investment could ever repay. August 1920. The inevitable came crashing down. A financial inspector revealed that Ponzi had virtually no real assets, only a mountain of empty promises. Panic spread like wildfire. Investors stormed his office, desperate to withdraw their money. Crowds that once cheered him now shouted in anger, demanding answers. The frenzy turned chaotic, police struggled to control the mob, and Ponzi, for the first time, looked shaken. In just a few days, the dream unraveled. The Boston Post published damning exposés, the banks froze his accounts, and the federal government finally stepped in. Ponzi surrendered himself, confessing that the scheme was over. In total, more than 20,000 investors were left devastated. Some lost life savings, others lost homes, and a few even took their own lives. The same man who once embodied the American dream now stood as a symbol of betrayal. The trial was swift and merciless. Ponzi was convicted of mail fraud and sentenced to federal prison. Newspapers splashed his face across front pages, no longer as a genius but as a fraudster. The mansion was seized, the cars sold, the empire dissolved into dust. Stripped of wealth, stripped of trust, Ponzi became a cautionary tale. And yet, even in disgrace, he never stopped spinning stories. From his prison cell, he told reporters that he could have fixed everything if only he had been given more time. "Yes, I gave them the best show in America," he later admitted, half boasting, half confessing. But the show was over. The victims were left to rebuild shattered lives, while his name became immortalized, not as a visionary, but as the father of deception. The story of Charles Ponzi leaves us with one undeniable truth. When something sounds too good to be true, it almost always is. Investors in 1920 believed in magic profits because they wanted to believe. They ignored logic, overlooked warnings, and surrendered to greed. Ponzi's scheme worked only because human desire for quick wealth blinded thousands to reality. The lesson echoes across generations. Easy money is the most dangerous illusion of all. Ponzi's victims were not fools. They were ordinary people, much like us. Teachers, shopkeepers, immigrants, all searching for security and a chance at a better life. They placed their trust in someone who spoke their language, who reflected their dreams. But misplaced trust can be devastating. The cost was not only in lost savings, but in broken families, lost homes, and shattered confidence in the system. The moral is clear. Trust must be earned, not bought with promises of impossible rewards. Thanks for watching till the end. Don't forget to support the channel with a like and a subscription. Today, a century later, the word Ponzi scheme is still alive, describing scams from Wall Street to cryptocurrency. His name has outlived him, not as a hero, but as a warning carved into financial history. The greatest legacy of Charles Ponzi is not his wealth or his fame, but the lesson he left behind. If opportunity demands blind faith and promises extraordinary returns without risk, it is not opportunity, it is a trap. To remember Ponzi is to remember vigilance, skepticism, and the value of hard-earned truth.